And now for something completely different.
Forget everything you've been told by others before. Get ready for the real deal, the full story. Real talk about money, markets, life. Now, it's The Real Investment Show with Lance Roberts, presented by RIA Advisors.
Welcome to our continuing interview series on The Real Investment Show. I'm your host, Lance Roberts, and today's special guest is a little bit of a different topic than we normally cover. Normally, we talk about markets and cryptocurrency and those type of things, but we have a lot of financial advisors that watch our show on a regular basis, and one of the challenges in the financial advisory space is really kind of getting some notice in the system in terms of advertising, public relations, advertising your business, taking advantage of social media, LinkedIn, TikTok, all these type of things. So today's special guest is Greg Joslyn. He's a principal at the Lowe Group, which is a leading investment communications and digital marketing firm out of Milwaukee. Greg does a lot of work in this space. He has a long background in the financial community. He's a reporter and editor for the capital markets publications for Institutional Investor, including Bond Week, Derivatives Week, and Corporate Financing Week. So he's got a lot of background in the financial space, which is useful because, for us, we spend a lot of money on marketing and have been spending years doing digital ads. And one of the challenges we found is hiring professionals that know what we do as financial advisors. It's not just, picking stocks and bonds and just that. There's so much more that goes into it. And getting that message out into the public space is always a challenge. And particularly for financial advisors that are independent, trying to build their own shops, getting your name out there is 9/10 of the job, right? It's hard to get clients if nobody knows who you are. So I thought today would be a very interesting interview with Greg to talk about kind of the changing world. It's a very different environment we live in today, really since 2007, the advent of the iPhone, of course, the IPO of Facebook, and then everything that's occurred since then in terms of social media. Even major companies today no longer advertise really as much on the traditional manners as they do hiring influencers to promote their products. So I thought this would be a good opportunity to talk with Greg about, to help financial advisors really kind of navigate 2026 and take advantage of what tools are out there to help grow your business. Greg, welcome to the show today. How are you?
Great to be here, Lance.
Good. So Greg, just real quick, why don't you just start out by telling us a little bit about, the Lowe Group, kind of what y'all do as kind of from an overview perspective.
Sure. We're a 20-year-old financial communications firm based in Milwaukee, clients all over the country. Breakdown is about a third large money managers, a third advisors, and then a third sort of allied organizations that want to be in touch with those constituencies.
So really, from kind of your vantage point, what is the, what's fundamentally different about marketing for financial advisors, going into 2026 from, say, even just 5 years ago?
Well, a lot is the same, but then you have to sort of put an AI umbrella on top of all of it. It's kind of informing everything that we do. It should be informing advisors' approach to their website, their social media presence, and even their media activities.
So, and again, I guess that's kind of a follow-up is the challenge today more about technology or attention spans and trust? What seems to be the biggest impediment to getting successful exposure?
I think, it's really just a matter of persistence. If you say I'm going to launch a podcast, you need to be committed to it and do it every 2 weeks or whatever you've said you're going to do it. You understand all that's involved in that. If you're going to start a blog, you need to be committed to populating it. And if you're going to go after the media and try to be in front of the media, that's not a one and done either. You really want to have a persistent voice if you want to raise your profile in the media. So it's kind of elbow grease, I would say.
Well, yeah, persistency is the key to success, as is always the case. And again, but that's kind of the hard part. For instance, if you work at a wirehouse, as an example, It can be very restrictive into what you can and cannot do in terms of taking advantage of social media or even going into the media itself. You can't say this, you can't say that. You've got to have a pre-scripted kind of outline of what you're going to say ahead of time, which, as you know, when you're being interviewed by, somebody on, say, Fox Business or whatever it is, you don't ever know what questions they're going to ask you up front. So, and those things can change at the last minute. So that's a challenge. You certainly don't have those kind of restrictions if you're an independent financial advisor, but you still have to be careful about what you're doing, what you say, because of SEC compliance and those type of issues. But, when you talk about the changes that, you're seeing today, what are kind of the easier aspects that if a financial advisor is just starting out, wanting to start getting, some exposure, where are some of the easier aspects to kind of start building some exposure and then go off from there?
I think, social media is a natural place for advisors to operate. You can have a really rich dialogue, and we can get into it if you'd like about
please.
of some ways to grow your social media following. You need to have people amplifying your messages. You need to make sure your messages aren't, exclusively promotional on social media. So there's kind of a 3 to 2 to 1 ratio of 3 industry comments, 2 comments about your firm maybe, and then 1 promotional post, and that's kind of the golden rule in social media. So I think it's important. That's a great place for advisors to start. You can. We always like content. We think content's really important for our clients. They might have a blog post. They might have white papers. Somebody in my chair who goes to the media a lot and pitches clients. It's really great to have a great piece of content to put in front of a reporter, not to just say, "Oh, you should speak to Lance. He's really smart," but rather, here's a piece he just did on the Mag 7 or an issue in the bond market. So content can be a big winner as well. But it's a commitment, right? You want to have a steady cadence of content. You want to establish a voice and then amplify it on social.
Yeah, and that, look, for me personally, I write, 2 blogs a week. I write a newsletter on Saturdays. We do a daily podcast. I mean, we produce a ton of content, and it's a full-time job. And one of the big challenges, I think, for advisors is just, committing to that process, because it's, some of the hardest aspects of producing content is just trying to come up with a topic, right? And
sure.
And so, getting that first sentence down on paper, that's always a challenge. But, one thing I've found is just over the years is that, to your point earlier, it's just you have to remain committed to that. So if you set the schedule, you can't stop on that schedule, because as soon as you stop, then everybody's attention quickly turns somewhere else. And whatever traffic you were building, you're going to lose pretty quickly.
Exactly. So you want to take small bites at it and set up a cadence that works for you of content. I know everybody has their day job to do, and content can be a great way to promote, but it takes total commitment. Absolutely.
Yeah. So from your perspective though, what would, so for somebody listening to the show right now is like, okay, I can write, I can do a blog, or I can do a podcast. What is a good cadence? What is enough to get the job done?
I think twice a month for blog posts to keep your readership engaged. There are some hacks and tricks for generating content. If you look at that blank page and you don't have any ideas, you can revisit a topic that you wrote about 2 years ago. Maybe put a spin on it, that's tied to the news cycle right now. That can often be a great way to make your content evergreen. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I think at least twice a month if it's a blog post. More often on social, certainly. Just if you're trying to build a following on social.
Right, and what would be a good schedule potentially for a social media channel?
I'd say 3 times a week is the minimum. LinkedIn is we recommend LinkedIn. There are obviously any number of social media platforms that financial professionals can use, but for most of our clients, LinkedIn proves to be the most effective, and so 3 LinkedIn posts a week is a pretty good clip.
Okay. So, and this is, again, just trying to get started, with all this is always a challenge. Just doing it, as Nike says, right? Just do it, is the process, is the kind of the hardest part, just getting started on it, building a rhythm with it. But, there's more to it than that. For instance, there's, a lot of work that goes on in terms of SEO, which is search engine optimization inside of blogs, using the right keywords, all these type of things. Does Low Group help writers and your clients write the right kind of content so that the search engines and those type of things also help promote that content?
We do, and the new frontier is AEO. It's AIEO. Sorry, you want to optimize your content not just for the search engines of yesterday, but for some of the artificial intelligence engines that are being used now, and so that kind of informs a different kind of content. You want a lot of bullet points. You want to ask questions and then answer them, because that lights up many of the AI models. You want to be in the media, because AI does, at least currently, the current models attach a lot of weight to earned media. It's kind of good news for a firm like ours, where we're getting our clients in the media all the time, because that gives some authority and credibility to your brand name.
Mm-hmm. But again, I guess that's the other challenge. So if I'm just starting out, how do I know? Are there software tools to use? Are there things that I can be applying to help me write better? I mean, one of the challenges of writing is just writing well, right? Being thorough, being topical, providing the right, data and facts, those type of things, but also keeping it readable and informative. And there's so many different opinions. I talk to a lot of different people, and some people say, oh, your blog shouldn't be longer than 900 words. And then I get another guy that tells me, oh, yeah, actual Google likes really long form articles. So they like 2,000 word articles. So there's a lot of different opinions, and which can get really confusing and difficult for somebody trying to get into this field, because you get so many different opinions. Are there some rules of thumbs to follow? And is there maybe a software that can help analyze what you're writing to make sure that you're producing what will work in terms of these search engines, et cetera?
I think the most important thing is to have something interesting to say. If you have an idea that you're excited to write about, it's unique or proprietary, that's a great starting point. There are tools. There are writing composition tools. You can put your writing through a model and say, what grade level is this written for? And you don't want to be writing for a college grade level. You want to be writing for a, ninth grade, maybe seventh grade.
So you're saying readers are stupid. That's what
I'm saying. Their attention spans are short, and they don't want to have to work too hard to understand what you're saying.
Right.
And then, on the AI point, it's not a bad idea to just go in and say, who's the best retirement planner in the St. Louis area, if
Mm-hmm.
you're working in St. Louis, and see what it says. And then you can query the AI engines and say, great, why didn't you mention, and you can put your firm name in. You can have like a dialogue with the AI, with ChatGPT or other AI models, and learn a lot about kind of how AI sees you and how you're showing up on AI. So that's another tool that's readily available to anyone. Just keep asking it about yourself and see what it says.
And as it comes back and says things to you, starting to implement those ideas, kind of what are some best practices around, building that type of process so that, the websites will see you and notice you and recommend you, outside of obviously, paying for the ads themselves.
Yeah. Well, AI doesn't attach a lot of weight to paid ads anyway. So, again, I think a lot of a media presence helps. Getting referrals helps. We have a blog post on lowcom.com that talks about the outsized footprint of Reddit for the current AI search engine. So, believe it or not, Reddit has a lot of weight. If your firm is mentioned in Reddit, I had a great experience with this advisory firm or this money manager. Any kind of referrals like that are great anywhere, but on Reddit, they're especially powerful.
And why is that? Is that because ChatGPT had to deal with Reddit for their information, or what causes that?
I think Google actually does have a relationship with Reddit, but I think it's also the case that the AI models attach a lot of weight to testimonials. So in any form, if people wrote a review of your firm on Google, or if they wrote about you on Reddit, it looks for authentic, organic posts by real people, and attaches a lot of weight to that, and a lot of weight to non-paid earned media. So if you're mentioned in Financial Planning magazine or Wealth Management, it notices that sort of thing too.
All right. Let's switch gears here a little bit and talk a little bit about kind of marketing in general, because for a lot of advisors, they try different forms of advertising and media, and it's marketing just doesn't work for our business. So in your experience, what do you think that's probably they're doing wrong if they're not getting a return on investment for the marketing dollars they're spending?
It's probably, one thing that's important, whether it's a marketing campaign or a media campaign, is being set up to optimize any traffic that you generate, right? So we've had clients where, we were almost gatekeepers for them and got them a ton of coverage in marquee publications like CNBC or Wall Street Journal. And they just didn't have the tools in place to optimize that on their website, to link it to their CMS system and create leads and benefit. So that's one thing, is just make sure you're ready for a marketing campaign. If people come to your website but they don't have a great experience, or you don't have any way to capture that activity, that's probably a wasted cost. We're big on earned media. We're classic PR firm, so we do think there's a benefit to getting in the media. People attach, there have been surveys that show investors attach a lot of weight to seeing your name in print, and they attach more weight if it's an article than if it's a display ad about your firm, because they assume that an editor has vetted it, that the reporter contacted you because you have some authority in your space. And so we obviously like earned media quite a bit. And social media, we're less expert on sort of paid marketing campaigns.
So great. I go out, I establish some credibility in the industry, and then I get contacted by Fox Business or CNBC. And they say, hey, I saw an article you wrote, I'd love to interview on it, because they're looking for, guests to talk about various things all the time. And so you get contacted for an interview. How should you go about prepping for that?
So we do a lot of media coaching, and a couple of things. We coach to, you really want to understand whether it's a print interview or a broadcast situation, you want to understand kind of where that reporter is coming from, what they're probably looking for from you. So you want to do a little bit of homework and understand who you're speaking with, what they're looking for. And then we coach to preparing a message triangle, right? You have 3 points that you really want to get across. And we coach to pivoting to those points. So we had a bond manager, for example, who was on CNBC, and as the PR firm, we did our work. We set up the interview. We shared notes with the producer of the show. This is the bond manager. This is how much they run. It's a core bond portfolio, so it's got credit. It's got the whole 9 yards. You can't be sure they're going to read that, right? And the presenter clearly hadn't done their homework. And so right away, she asked my client, so what do you make of Jerome Powell's comments today? What do they mean for the equity markets? And I was so proud of him, because he pivoted right away. He didn't embarrass the journalist. He could have at that point gotten a little been out of shape and said, well, I'm a bond manager. Instead he said, we do think that Chairman Powell's remarks, obviously the equity markets have already responded to it, and we think they're, very much risk-on remarks. As a credit manager, here's what I'm going to do. We're going further out on the credit curve. So it was like a perfect pivot, and he wanted to talk about credit. the presenter didn't quite ask him the question that he was looking for, and he pivoted perfectly. So I think if you go into an interview, whether it's a print interview or a broadcast, and you're armed with your message triangle, and you're artful about pivoting to the points that you want to get across, you're going to be ready for that, and you're going to come across well. I mean, there are other things that we work with clients on, particularly for broadcast. Your lighting, your connection. You want to make sure all of that's in place. And interviews are every bit as much about listening as they are about getting your points across, because you want to make sure that you understand the question, and you want to make sure that reporter is understanding what you've said. You can pick up little clues that maybe that didn't quite sink in what you just said to them, and so you want to circle back to that, because the last thing you want is for the viewer to have a bad impression of a misimpression of what you said, or for somebody reading a story to have a misimpression. So there's a lot of different things that you can do to prepare for an interview.
Yeah, no, it's interesting to talk about, because I've run into that a lot of times over the years. Pre-COVID, before the shutdown, when you get called for an interview, you had to drive to like a remote production facility. And like in Houston, there was like 2 or 3 different ones. You would drive to it. They had the whole studio set up. You go in, sit in front of a camera with a green ring on it. They say, look at the camera, and then you would hear the voice in your ear, and then you'd have to answer the question. Now it's all by Zoom or whatever. And so wherever you're at, to your point, you've got to have, the right lighting, make sure your camera angles are right, and all that type of stuff. So a lot of the onus is now on you to try to get that right. Which has made it a lot more challenging. I mean, it's easier. I don't have to drive across town anymore in the middle of traffic trying to get somewhere. But there's also a lot of other challenges of just having the right setup for doing interviews, in your house or in your office, wherever you're doing it from.
Yeah, the broadcast networks have definitely gotten used to that, and they're comfortable with it. And people have gotten better at it too, with all the Zoom calls that we do every day. I would add, however, if you're going to be in New York, that's a great opportunity to set up some media. We will go to New York with our clients and set up a full day of meetings, and it might be, Wall Street Journal, Barron's, and then a CNBC hit in the afternoon, and then, maybe a podcast taping. So you can leverage that. In person, all things being equal, producers still prefer to have the person sitting there in the studio. So that's just one thing I would say is something to bear in mind. If you've got travel, try to carve out an extra day for media, and start doing that outreach ahead of time.
So with content, again, we're just kind of talking about this, and talking about, before, kind of the initial question was, a lot of advisors, they try advertising, it doesn't work. They try a podcast or whatever, and it doesn't work. And we talked about some of the reasons why, but where do advisors most commonly waste kind of time, money, resources? Is it on websites, social media, paid ads, seminars? Where should advisors be focusing their efforts in terms of building a public presence?
Well, Lance, how tough it is to put a podcast together. I mean, you've been doing it a long time. You've got a studio, you've got everything you need. We do see, a lot of our clients say, maybe we should have a podcast. And, my advice to them is usually, podcasts are kind of like a boat. Sometimes it's better to have a friend with a boat than to have your own boat. And so, we say, put yourself out there, try to join some podcasts. I think podcasts can be great if you want to have a richer dialogue with your current circle. Like if you have a lot of clients or a lot of prospects and you want to start a podcast, that can be a great way to sort of another channel to communicate with them. But starting a podcast from scratch and expecting to be, the next Lance Roberts or the next Josh Brown with, 1 million followers is really tough. It's a lot of work. And so that's one area where I think you want to be really judicious about committing. So podcasts are tough to do. Maybe better to go get on somebody else's podcast. Thank you very much. And
we're glad to have you here, Greg.
Right. Beyond that, it's sort of what we talked about. You want to set a cadence that you can live up to in terms of content, in terms of media outreach. Just if you just do one trip to New York and set up a few meetings and never follow up with that reporter or never send them a piece of content, 3 months later that they might be able to use, that's probably not a great use of your time either. And then I think, on the paid side, again, it's kind of just a matter of making sure that you're set up to optimize any traffic that you're paying for to get inbound.
Yeah, and I think that's key. I mean, if it's great to go do the advertising work, but if they get to your website and there's not a way to contact you or ask a question, then they're going to get frustrated pretty quickly and leave, and then not come back to your website. Which so the whole process is making sure you're creating a funnel that you can you can build this attention, but you've got to be able to capture it and then at least be able to start converting that potentially into some lead source at some point down the road. But that brings up a good point, though. There's a lot of people in the media, and I have a burning question I want to ask you. So there's a lot of people that are perpetually bullish or perpetually bearish in the media, and I think there's a fine line between visibility and credibility, and maybe this is just my opinion, but when you're promoting these views and these things like that, how do you make sure that you're getting visibility for having maybe an outrageous statement, but it also potentially affects your credibility in the future? So how do you kind of navigate that fine line between writing something that'll get you visibility, but maintaining credibility as you go forward?
That's a great one. You're right. There are perma bears and perma bulls out there. I think really just being able to articulate your process. You use a comment about where you think the market's going to illustrate your process. You do want to be provocative. You want to be a little contrarian. Sometimes that can work, but as long as I think you're able to defend it, people will understand where you were coming from afterwards, and not necessarily hold it against you if the market went the other way. They still got a good sort of reality check from the conversation from you. And so, I think that's every bit as important. I started my career at Institutional Investor, and we had the All-America research team, and it was a poll of institutional investors, and they would say, I don't mind that this Goldman analyst was wrong about telecoms because she always makes me think. Right. Mm-hmm. And so they're not looking for stock picks. I don't think anybody watches CNBC and goes out and buys a stock based on one person's view. But I think if you can speak, intelligently and demonstrate your process, that's every bit as powerful as, having the right market call that nobody's going to remember 2 weeks from now anyway.
Right. Well, and the thing with, and particularly with, doing television like a CNBC or Fox, you don't have a lot of time. Your total interview may be 3-4 minutes, and they're going to ask you 3 or 4 questions in that time frame. So and to your point, you have to control your responses to get in your advertising or your marketing. So for instance, I'll do a Fox Business interview, for example, with Charles Payne. And he'll ask me about, hey, what are your favorite stock picks right now? And which are fine. And I have no problems. Like, hey, we like ExxonMobil, we like, General Electric, whatever. But I'll always include, but we're taking profits in some of these things because our management process requires us to control risk within portfolios because, yes, things are going up, but they don't go up forever. So I always try to revert back to, great, I can answer your question, but then also include some time, give yourself some flexibility to include your process and talk about what you're doing. Because again, I agree with you. I think the best results from those things have come from people going, oh, I like the way he views the market, not what he's doing. I like the way he looks at it.
Yep. It sounds like you have a message triangle, Lance.
It's more of a obtuse rectangle, but yeah.
Whatever works. But
yeah, exactly.
That's exactly what we coach to, right? The stock has had a run up. We still like it, but we have a strict risk management process, and so we're trimming our position a little bit. But we still love the stock, and here's why. So that's you answered Charlie Payne's question, but you got in a little bit more color about how you work and why you're credible.
Right. So how important is positioning in your niche, I guess, a lot of advisors, are kind of more generalist in a lot of ways, right? They're doing financial planning, they're doing kind of, general broad portfolios. But, if you really want to establish yourself, you really have to kind of find a niche that you're really good at, you're really knowledgeable at, so you can build that. It's hard to be an expert in everything, right? You can't really be a jack of all trades. So how important is it for an advisor to find a niche that they can really set themselves out in, and then really kind of to that point, particularly in this environment of kind of more general wealth management, still make a viable marketing push without getting away from your overall general approach to financial management, but establishing this niche. In other words, you don't want to lock yourself into a niche of like, oh, this guy's only good at junk bonds. I'm just picking a topic. But really, I'm an institutional bond manager. I'm knowledgeable about the junk bond space, but we manage entire portfolios of bonds. So for us, we manage stock and bond portfolios. We manage a broad array of things, but I've kind of established myself as a risk manager, and that's kind of my niche. So how do you kind of coach advisors, or how do you encourage advisors to start building a niche that can benefit their overall approach to their practice?
I think having a niche is a proven success model. Michael Kitces, other people talk about that being a real way to distinguish yourself. And then, so I would flip it around and say, pick a niche that you're truly expert in, and that you think you can build a practice around, but then establish yourself as a domain expert in that niche in the media. So it's really great to say, be able to go to, this person's a retirement income expert, or this person's a tax planning expert, and here's a blog post they just wrote about the new tax bill, because they're such an expert in this field. So I think for advisors, the niche will be determined by your expertise, but you definitely want to, once you establish a niche or start building a niche, you want to amplify that in the media with content on social media.
Yeah. And I think partly too, Greg, is that your niche should be a natural, right? It should be a natural fit. I mean, you shouldn't try to force getting yourself into a niche. Like I'm gonna go for I'm gonna be a Social Security specialist, and then you go study like crazy to learn everything about it, and you're trying to force yourself into that role. It should be something that's more of just a natural fit for whatever your abilities are. I mean, everybody in the financial industry has they're better at one thing than another. Some guys are really good at managing money, other guys are really good at financial planning, whatever it is. But it should be something that's very naturally a fit for you, because that also, going back to our original conversation about social media and writing and these things, the passion you have for whatever that niche is that you're really good at is going to reflect through that output that you're doing. The reason that we're doing this, obviously, as an advisor, is I want to generate leads from it. And again, we touched on the point earlier about making sure that the website is set up to capture these leads that are coming in, so you have the ability to try to convert these leads into prospects and eventually clients. But one of the things we touched on earlier was compliance. And, advisors have much looser restrictions in terms of compliance and regulations and what they're doing, in terms of what they can produce, what they can say. If you work for a brokerage wirehouse like a Merrill Lynch, much more restrictive. So kind of looking at those two different aspects, how do you coach your clients on not only how to do these things to increase their visibility, but also stay within compliance?
Work with your compliance department. It doesn't pay to fight City Hall. It doesn't pay to fight your compliance department, but especially for RIAs, you can, I think if you're at a broker dealer, you might need to run every tweet or every post you're going to do by compliance ahead of time. With an RIA, I think if you establish a good relationship with compliance and some policies and procedures that you put in place, then you can be a little bit more freewheeling on social media. You still want to avoid promissory language. You want to archive what you're doing on social media. I think most SROs require that. But you're absolutely right that an RIA can be a little bit more forthcoming on social media, and it can be a really great lead gen tool.
Well, and so this kind of brings us to our last kind of venture here in terms of this. And again, thank you so much for your time today, because I know there's probably a lot of advisors that are trying to figure this out, and there's so many traps and pitfalls to social media. Building the right LinkedIn post, building the right TikTok post, whatever it is, whichever social media channel you're using. And actually, that's kind of a good question. You said you like LinkedIn. Y'all use a lot of LinkedIn, have some good success. We do too. We like LinkedIn a lot for the work that we do. But there is a lot of other channels. And here's kind of the question is, there's a lot of channels to choose from, right? Whether it's TikTok or Snapchat or, LinkedIn or Meta, or Facebook, whatever you want to call it these days. Of course, X is there as well, but not necessarily the clients that you're wanting to attract are on those platforms, right? So in other words, as I was talking about with Reddit earlier, I probably don't have any clients that regularly peruse Reddit. All right. It's a right. Wrong demographic, right? So you need to also I think you need to understand what your demographic is, and then select your media channels from that perspective. If you're trying to attract a certain type of investor or client to your business. I mean, do you agree with that, or do you have any suggestions?
I do. And, so we always advise limit the number of platforms you're on. We almost always suggest LinkedIn and maybe one other platform where you think, you could set up an Instagram account that's about your firm, really. And, you don't want to do the same content on every social media platform either. That just doesn't work. And so maybe LinkedIn is where you post, professional commentary, links to your content. And Instagram's where you post about your firm is a great place to work, and you show, you have photos of your holiday party or your outing that you had in the summer, your golf outing with clients. So, I think I would say limit the number of platforms you're on and be very intentional and thoughtful about tailoring the content and tailoring the presence to that platform.
Are there any, from your experience, do you, again, probably why you choose LinkedIn, but that's where you've seen the most success in terms of advisors finding the right type of clients has been through maybe LinkedIn and Instagram. What about Meta? What about X and some of these other platforms?
X was a great platform for a long time. It's kind of become the Wild West, and I would, historically we would advise, LinkedIn and Twitter or X is a great combination. It's just it's so hard to sort of find meaningful content on X these days. I still like it. There's still a vibrant financial community. So if you like, one thing we didn't talk about, Lance, is on social media you don't want to just be a one-way experience where you're blasting out posts day after day. You do want to be involved and comment on other people's posts, and so X can be a great place for that, to have still have conversations with people about things happening in the market or practice management. So yeah, it can still work. It's just kind of tougher to navigate these days than it was. I think there's a lot of bots on X and everything like that.
Yeah, I can tell you for a fact there's a lot of bots on X from the number of imposters that show up on a daily basis on my X account. So yeah, absolutely true. So best advice here from Greg is post your stuff on X and then troll everybody else. So you heard it from Greg. So
act like a bot.
Exactly. All right, Greg, let's talk a little bit about as we kind of get ready to wrap up here. This is always the challenge, I think, for every advisor, right? So we've kind of got some good tips and things to think about, and it's like, okay, great. Greg told me I need to start a blog. I need to commit to that. I can do that. I can do a podcast once a week or twice a month, whatever it is. I can do that. Awesome. Great. Fantastic. You're going to have to spend some money on this, right? You've got to get it out into the media. You're going to have to potentially, pay for some support from a company like yours. And by the way, if you're listening to this podcast and like to contact Greg, he's at the Low Group. We'll post his email address at the bottom of this video, so you can reach out to Greg directly. But what kind of budget? Say, let's just take a hypothetical. I want to come to you. I want you to get me started into a PR campaign. What kind of budget should I be thinking about? And the reason this is important, obviously, is that I have to tie this back to the amount of assets that I'm expecting to raise. So in other words, if I'm going to spend, $10,000 on, or $100,000 on a campaign, I'm just throwing out numbers. If I charge 1% on assets under management, I've got to raise $10 million to justify that, right? So, I need to have some type of idea about what kind of success I need to justify the expense. That's any business that we're running. So kind of from your standpoint, what should an advisor be thinking about? And whether they use you or some other firm, whatever, or just want to do it on their own, what kind of budget do you think is reasonable to be putting out and then monitoring the results from that to at least get started?
A lot of, if you're an small independent advisor, a lot of the things we've talked about today, you can do on your own. You can, be more intentional about your social media. You can think about the 3-2-1 ratio and optimizing your social media for the new AI universe. And your content as well. If you're ready to go to the next level and work with a firm, I think we do project work for firms when they're maybe they're doing an important M&A transaction, merging with another group, and that's that can just be low 5 figures for a project like that, but then we really like to work on retainer with organizations that that really want to have that steady voice in the market. Again, it doesn't pay to just do one splashy media event and then disappear for the rest of the year. You really want to be out there every month. So most of our clients we work with on retainer, and again, it tends to be like low 5 figures.
Per month,
monthly for that, yeah.
And look, this is really important, Greg. And I think this is the biggest mistake when I meet with other advisors, and they're like saying, Lance, I want to try to grow my business, and I'm like, okay, well, how much money do you contribute to marketing? None, right? I spend my money, and then I on my business, and then I take home the rest. I think this is one of the biggest mistakes that advisors that are independent, particularly independent advisors wanting to build their own book, wanting to build their own business, they're out doing it kind of the traditional manner. They're going out and they're mixing with family and friends and going to a golf course and hoping to pick up clients, and that works. That's worked forever. It continues to work. There's nothing knocking that. But I think one of the biggest mistakes that advisors make is not building a marketing budget into their operational budget, so that they do have, I'm going to set aside this much money this year to market, and then either hire a firm like yours or just spend dollars on marketing of some form, to get their name and brand, build their brand, get their name recognition out, those type of things. And that seems to be the biggest impediment that I've seen from other advisors I've met with and coached with, is just there's no functional effort on the marketing side.
Sure. You need to think about what that budget is, and also the time budget, because we do a lot for our clients. We get their content within the red zone, and we prep them for interviews, but at the same time it's a collaboration. So we get on the phone twice a week with our clients. How are we doing? Or where does this campaign stand? And so all of that's a big time commitment, and so you need to think about that as well within your workday. How much time can I budget, as well as dollars for marketing? But it is important. It's the only way to grow.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Greg, like I said, we're going to put your contact information here at the bottom of this video. So if you're watching this video and like to talk to Greg and ask him about his services, feel free to do that. We certainly encourage it. Greg, I appreciate your time today. Any closing thoughts? Anything that we didn't cover today that you think would be important for advisors?
You touched on it just now, Lance. To grow your firm, you really need to get the word out about what you're doing and how you're differentiated, and whether that's paid marketing or media or just bolstering your social media activity. You do need to be thoughtful and make that happen. I think it's very important.
Yeah. Greg, thank you so much for your time. That concludes our interview series for today with Greg Joslyn from the Low Group. Again, his name and contact information right here down below. So feel free, if you're an advisor wanting to reach, wanting to grow your business and you haven't really explored the benefits of advertising and marketing, and especially public relations, contact Greg. He can certainly get you pointed in the right direction. All right, y'all have a great day. Be sure and go by the website, realinvestmentadvice.com. Click on the link to ask a question. It's always there. I answer every email every single day. Always happy to help you out any way I can. realinvestmentadvice.com. And be sure and like and subscribe to this channel. It helps us keep bringing on guests like Greg and others. Helps us promote the channel as well. So again, your liking and your subscribing certainly helps us a lot, and we do appreciate it very much. Have a great day. We'll see you back here tomorrow in the next edition of The Real Investment Show.